Welcome to Ask Historians Aloud. In this special episode series, we'll be bringing you curated audio content. This series features questions and answers from our subreddit, provided by our amazing Flair panel. This is a way of casting light on the great questions and answers that are happening every day at Ask Historians. To learn more, or for even more content, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Please also check out the Patreon, which goes towards supporting this endeavor.
An answer to the question, when did it become socially acceptable in the United States for women to smoke? Interestingly, smoking was only barely tolerated as a masculine habit for much of the 19th century, heavily restricted in when and where it was acceptable. For instance, in the 1874 Gentleman's Book of Etiquette, the writer instructed men not to smoke pipes or cigars in company with women, unless perhaps in a garden, and only after asking for permission. In the streets during the day, in a room of the house frequently used by women. For instance, in the 1874 Gentleman's Book of Etiquette, the writer instructed men not to smoke pipes or cigars in company with women, unless perhaps in a garden and only after asking permission, in the streets during the day, in a room of the house frequently used by women, in a public place where women might come by, in a railway car with a woman present, in a closed carriage, in a church or in the presence of clergy, at a racetrack, or in the coffee room at a hotel. Clothes were to be changed after smoking if you were meeting up with women, and the mouth rinsed out. It became more acceptable to ignore many of these guidelines around the same time that women began to smoke themselves. While the practice was common among women in Europe, upper-class American women began smoking cigarettes only in private at the end of the 19th century and in the first decade of the 20th, spurring a fierce, mostly female-led opposition associated with women's suffrage and temperance. Over the course of the second decade of the century, 1909 to 1919, however, the practice became widely accepted in public. It took until the invention of the cigarette rolling machine in the 1880s for women to really begin to smoke. The machine rolled tightly packed cigarette, didn't flake on clothing and the lips, it allowed for filters, and it came in much more mild flavors than cigars. Younger adult women were reported as smoking cigarettes in holders in high society cottages and after dinner parties in Newport, Rhode Island, the summer spot for the American ultra-rich, in 1907, to the annoyance of their elders. And in the early 19-teens, it was becoming normal to see it happening at private dinner parties and in restaurants. It was still fairly shocking to many, but with women increasingly taking up the habit and lighting up, it was in the best interests of the restaurateurs and hoteliers to allow it without making a fuss. Soon, middle-class women began to make the news for casually smoking in places other than hotel smoking or dining rooms and restaurants. Ethel Shackman, for instance, caused a stir by smoking when she dropped in to see the state legislature in session in Albany in 1913. In 1915, a large number of women began to smoke on the Atlantic City boardwalk. By 1919, it was more reported on when an establishment outright forbade women to smoke than when it was allowed. As mentioned, there was a strong opposition to women smoking even when it became somewhat ordinary, and this opposition came in large part from other women. This didn't quite go away until World War II, which is when the complete normalization of smoking took place.
You've been listening to the Ask Historians podcast. Please support us at patreon.com/askhistorians. Find more history like this by following us on Twitter and Facebook, and by visiting us at askhistorians.reddit.com and ask hundreds of historians and enthusiasts anything you want to know about history.